So these guys are just preparing some balloons for delivery. And this guy is on his way to deliver the balloons to his neighbors. And this is what these balloons are. They are incendiary balloons which have bombs attached to them. And this is one example of the kind of damage these balloons can cause. So hello everyone and welcome to the Israeli. And today we're going to talk about incendiary balloons. Yesterday was the flag march, and in response, Hamas had rioters on the border fence with Israel and had people launch incendiary balloons into Israeli territory, which caused fires, and we're going to talk about it. So, first of all, what are incendiary balloons? An incendiary balloon or balloon bomb is a balloon inflated with lighter than air gas, such as hot air, hydrogen, or helium, that has a bomb, incendiary device, or Molotov cocktail attached. The balloon is carried by the prevailing wind to the target area where it falls or releases its payload. So this is what they do, and they do this a lot when they don't want to go into a full-on conflict. So they launch incendiary balloons because it's not a rocket, and it's harder for Israel to find a way to fight that. Okay, so let's go to the article here. Yesterday was the flag march, and this was the response. IDF Strike Gaza Strip after incendiary balloon fires. A number of fires broke out in southern Israel on Tuesday, with at least 20 of them sparked by incendiary balloons launched from Gaza. It's 26 now. The IDF struck a number of military sites belonging to Hamas on the Gaza Strip. The IDF is prepared for all scenarios. Hamas responded to the strike Tuesday night, calling the strikes a failed attempt to stop our people's solidarity and resistance with the Holy City and to cover up the unprecedented state of confusion for the Zionist establishment in organizing the so-called flag march. This is so interesting how Hamas is trying to use Israel's democracy against itself. And I personally think that it's wonderful. Like, this is something good that Hamas is doing. It's not good that it's launching these incendiary balloons or having riots, sending young people to riot on the border fence. That's not good at all, but it is challenging Israel's democracy. And a strong democracy should be able to handle this kind of challenges. And it's interesting to see how they try to use Israel's democracy against itself. But they are wrong here because the march wasn't cancelled. If the march had been cancelled, then yes, they would have been correct, but it wasn't. And putting the march on a safer route or less provocative route is something that is normal. It's totally democratic to do. The Pride Parade was also on a route that was more limited, so it can be secured, and that is fine. The fact that the flag march happened, and it happened fairly peacefully on all sides, this is a win for democracy within itself, not just for Israel, because I don't see it like a win-lose. Everybody is losing here, but it is a win for democracy. Okay, let's continue. The strike comes after dozens of Palestinians rioted and clashed with the IDF along the Gaza border on Tuesday as tensions rose surrounding the flag march. So again, they sent young people to the border to riot on the border. Now, you can see videos. This is not a protest. This is a riot. They have Molotov cocktails. They throw rocks. It's violent, yeah? And I'm not saying that protests need to be always like singing Kumbaya, but Molotov cocktails and throwing rocks and coming prepared for battle, that's a riot. And on a border fence with another country that you're in conflict with, sending young people. During the clashes, the Palestinians within small groups of investigators were shot in the leg and taken away from the scene in light condition. According to Palestinian media, Israel forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets at the rioters in order to disperse them. Large amount of smoke, and the riot continued into the night. Okay, so there was one injured, which is good because the last time they sent thousands of people to the border to riot, there were quite a few fatalities. And this time around, new government, which is very, very important, and it seems like they're dealing with it in a little bit differently. They try to make less damage and still come with the upper hand. So from a riot like this on a border, having one person injured lightly, I think that's a good job for the Israeli army and the new Israeli government. So this is pictures from the border. You see fires. They burned rubber tires, which I think is fine. If you do it on your side of the border and you want to yell and shout, that's fine. But throwing Molotov cocktails or rocks at soldiers, you're taking a risk. I'm just saying, you're taking a risk. A number of fires broke out, at least 20. Now it's 26. Photos of terrorists preparing such balloons to launch towards Israel. At least one explosive balloon was reported over southern Israel, with residents reporting that they saw and heard the balloon explode in the air, according to Israeli media. 3 Gazans were arrested by the IDF after they crossed the border fence. So they were arrested. They weren't shot, which is very, very good. This is the way we need to deal with this. Not automatically shoot just because they broke the law. You don't execute somebody who broke the law immediately. You arrest them and then you see what's going on. Iron Dome anti-missile. Oh, by the way, Israel doesn't execute anybody, and the few cases that we did have soldiers that did, like bad apples, that did do that did execute terrorists or suspects that were already restrained. They've been judged and they went to jail. And the Israeli army does that much more than any other army. So if you do decide that you're taking upon yourself to be a judge, jury, and executioner in the Israeli army, you will pay a price for it. It's not brushed under the rug. Just to say. But it does happen, but it's not okay, and Israeli army does judge those things, investigate and judge those things. As part of security preparation in light of the flag march, the paths of flight, so they changed the paths of flights, and the Iron Dome was prepared, obviously. Defense Minister's security assessment. Okay, so this is the intelligent, and okay, so this is Hamas, the courageous stance of the Palestinian resistance and its decisive decision to force Israeli occupation to change the paths of so-called March flag away from its blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque, change the path of civil aviation. This is a problem, but what can you do? You have to protect people, right? And intensify the deployment of the Iron Dome, a protective weapon, defensive, confirm the achievement of the deterrence equation it imposed in the Battle of Saif el-Quds. So it admits here that they started the last cycle. They were the one who instigated the last cycle, not Israel. They admit here that Israel was only defending itself. And it says it here with charging its Iron Dome, preparing the intensified deployment of the Iron Dome, a defensive measure. Hamas is a terrorist group. I'm not here to criticize the Palestinians. I'm here to criticize Hamas, and people have to understand what Israel is dealing with when it deals with Hamas. I'm not saying that the last Israeli government was all peaches and roses. It wasn't. It wasn't working towards peace, in my opinion. Hopefully this new government will, but still, it doesn't make Hamas any less of a terrorist organization. And its success in imposing new rules of engagement on the enemy. So it didn't, because Israel did attack Gaza and military outposts of Hamas because of these balloons and riots. The valiant resistance will remain a protective shield for our people, and the behavior of Israel occupation on the ground will determine the course and nature of dealing with it. Hamas threatens but remembers what happened when it was fired, so it did not fire yesterday. I don't think so. I think that the reason it didn't fire yesterday because yes, they need a little rest and rebuilding after the last cycle, but also the Egyptians are there and they have a lot of pressure from Egypt, and this new government, they don't know how they react, so they're testing it lightly, and this is something that they usually do after a cycle to show that they're not out of the game. They do this balloon thing and the riots. So I don't think that there was any deterrence from the last operation. I really don't. If Hamas knows that after burning fields we will attack empty compounds, it will continue. And then if you will, because of balloons, Israel will retaliate much more aggressively, then a new cycle of violence will begin. Again, rockets and everything. It's going to continue anyway because Hamas is a terror organization. That's what it does. You cannot change it into being pacifistic all of a sudden. Let's see. Okay, Hamas terrorist movement had called for a day of rage to confront the long-awaited and controversial flag march on Tuesday, encouraging Palestinians to mobilize to Al-Aqsa and the old city of Jerusalem. Let next Tuesday be a day of mobilization and ban towards Al-Aqsa Mosque and a day of anger and the defiance of the occupier, said Hamas in a statement on Sunday. Show God and your people what you have done in it and be the best sword for Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa. Palestinian jihadists also had a statement. So again, they called for the Palestinians and the local people, the local Arab Palestinians that live in Jerusalem, to confront this march and start something over there, start a provocative march of their own, and start some kind of conflict, so they'll have a reason to protect Al-Aqsa, to protect Jerusalem again, and start a new cycle and become the Palestinian heroes again. But fortunately, that did not happen. And the people in the West Bank, from what I see, they do not want to be like Gaza, and they do not want to go into this conflict in Israel. And I think that a lot of interviews that have been done with Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis lately, because of Ram, which are in the government, the Arab Party, which is in the new coalition government, most Palestinians apparently truly believe that Israel is a fact that's not going to disappear. 6-7 million Jews are not just going to leave Israel. Israel is there to stay, and they need to come to a solution with it. So apparently in the West Bank, they already realize that they're going to have to live next to Israel, so they don't go into this conflict that Hamas is trying to push them in. And this is the second time that they haven't joined this conflict that Hamas was trying to push them in. And that brings me a lot of hope. It truly does bring me a lot of hope. I understand that maybe for the Palestinians it's much more difficult to publicly call out for peace and publicly criticize Hamas and publicly have peace marches in Ramallah or whatever. It's much more difficult than for Israelis in Israel. But I think this type of behavior shows their intentions. And I think this type of behavior of not joining Hamas in this conflict shows that they are interested in the two-state solution, and they are interested in living in peace next to Israel, at least when it comes to the West Bank. That's from the actions that I see. If anybody doesn't agree with my observation, please just comment below and I'll try to answer it. So despite the threats, the march took place with relatively little violence. Some clashes were reported between Palestinians and Israeli security forces in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, as to be expected, but it's normal. But they had largely ended by Tuesday evening. Okay, so this is more or less what happened with the incident yesterday with the flag march and with the incendiary balloons and the Israeli strikes on Gaza again. And that's about it. So, hopefully now with Biden, this new coalition government, and Egypt, enough pressure will be put on Hamas, and maybe they'll be able to divert the money this time to the people of Gaza without involving Hamas enough, and maybe find a way to weaken it, but without true international support, that will, and especially Palestinian support, to stop supporting Hamas, it's never going to end, because the Hamas ideology lives in the heart of many people, and you cannot just make that disappear out of nothing. You need to change reality in order to make that disappear. And we need to start doing something. We need to give the people of Gaza hope, whether Hamas is there or not. Yeah, and then hopefully, with the right kind of work, the Palestinians in Gaza will get rid of Hamas themselves. Now again, people might say, yeah, but look at Iran. Iran has this Ayatollah regime for 40 years now, and everything was done in order to help the Iranian people get rid of the regime over there. And every time the students go out on protest or something, they disappear, and then the regime stays in place, just like, let's say, similar to China. But Gaza is not Iran. Gaza is not China. It's not this huge country that has its own resources and its own kind of power to stay. It's a small place under a lot of pressure, a lot of economic pressure, social pressure, conflict pressure, every kind of pressure possible. And it is possible to change the hearts and minds in Gaza. And I think the West Bank proves it, because the second intifada, which was led by Hamas, and this is the problem with Hamas, we know Hamas has to be a very brutal terrorist organization that doesn't mind killing anybody, its own children, women, soldiers, non-soldiers, civilians, innocents. Everything is fair game. Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, Arabs, everything is legitimate in their eyes for their target. So, we have to make them disappear, and I think that it is possible to do that, because they led also the West Bank in the second intifada, but now the West Bank is different. I don't think they'll accept terror organization like Hamas again in the West Bank the way it used to be, at least. Okay, so I hope yesterday was a bit more optimistic, because Israel did have its flag march, whether you agree with it or not. Hamas did challenge Israel's democracy. Democracy did prevail. Nothing really happened in the south with Gaza, in the border with Gaza. No new cycle of violence started, and so far it seems like it's holding. There's a new coalition government in Israel, which will be very interesting to see what it does. Hopefully it will react and act differently than the last government. From yesterday's action, it seems like they are taking responsibility and acting responsibly. So only time will tell, We have to follow this and see what happens. Okay, guys, thank you again for watching this video. Please, if you like this video, especially if you watched this far, please like and subscribe. If you have anything to comment, just comment and I'll answer it. Comment below and I'll answer it, or I'll make a video about it if you have any suggestions for another video that I should make. And I'll see you on the next video. So have a great day. Bye.